The day Imogen found the iPad on the kitchen counter, she almost didn't look. She'd told herself she wasn't that kind of wife. She trusted Callum. She'd always trusted Callum. Through the long nights when he came home, smelling like conference rooms and airport coffee. Through the weekends his mother Rosalind seemed to materialize at their front door without calling ahead. Through all the small moments where something felt slightly off, but she'd talked herself back from the edge of suspicion. She was not that kind of wife. But the screen was already on, and the name at the top of the message thread was his mother's. Imogen set down her mug. She stood very still in the kitchen of the house she and Callum had bought together 4 years ago. The house she'd put her own savings into. The house where she'd planted a garden in the backyard and painted the nursery a soft sage green when she was pregnant with their daughter Ellie. She stood still and she read. It took her about 40 seconds to understand what she was looking at. Another 10 seconds to feel her legs go numb, and then the kettle clicked off behind her, and the sound of it was so ordinary, so completely indifferent to what had just happened, that she almost laughed. Almost. Imogen had married Callum Ashworth when she was 27, which her mother had said was exactly the right age, and her best friend Petra said was probably a year too soon. She hadn't listened to either of them, which was, she would later understand, the first in a long series of mistakes she made, because she loved someone too much to see clearly. Callum was handsome in that quiet, competent way, not flashy, not dramatic. He coached her through her first panic attack on the subway in downtown Toronto, talked her through it like it was the most natural thing in the world, and she'd thought, this is the person I want beside me. He was steady. That was the word she always used. Callum was steady. His mother Rosalind was another matter entirely. Imogen had noticed it at their first Christmas. The way Rosalind watched her across the table, taking stock, measuring. Not hostile exactly. More like an auditor who hadn't made up her mind yet. Imogen had tried. She brought homemade butter tarts. She asked about Rosalind's garden. She laughed at the right moments and stayed quiet during the ones where staying quiet seemed expected. None of it was ever quite enough. She just has high standards. Callum told her on the drive home that first Christmas. She's like that with everyone. Imogen would later learn that Rosalind was not in fact like that with everyone. She was like that specifically, surgically, with her. The first 2 years of their marriage were fine. More than fine, honestly. They were good. Callum's work in commercial real estate was steady. Imogen's job at a nonprofit doing housing advocacy kept her busy and purposeful, and Ellie arrived 14 months in, small and furious and perfect. Those early months with a newborn were hard in the way everyone tells you they'll be hard, but there was something in the exhaustion that felt earned. Real. The trouble started, Imogen would think later, when her parents sold the family property. Her mom and dad had owned a 40-acre parcel outside of Kingston for 30 years. Land that had been in the family before that, rough country with a creek running through it, and a stand of maples that turned brilliant every October. Imogen had grown up spending summers there. When the offer came in from a development company, her parents agonized for months. But they were both getting older, the upkeep was becoming too much, and the number the developers put on the table was significant. They signed. The sale went through on a Thursday in early March. By Saturday, Rosalind had driven up from Hamilton and was sitting in their living room with a folder of printed real estate listings. There's no better time to invest, she said, spreading the pages across Imogen and Callum's coffee table. The market's shifting. You need to move quickly. Imogen had looked at Callum. Callum had looked at his coffee. That night, she asked him directly, "Did you tell your mother about my parents' sale?" "I mentioned it," he said. "I didn't think it was a secret. It's not a secret. It's personal. And the money is my parents' money, Callum. It has nothing to do with us." He'd nodded. He'd said she was right. And Imogen had felt the particular unease of a reassurance that doesn't quite land, like a key that turns in the lock but doesn't open anything. She let it go. She was good at letting things go. The iPad had been left on the counter on a Wednesday in November. Callum had a 6 a.m. flight to Calgary. He'd rushed out, coffee barely touched, laptop bag half-zipped. He was always slightly chaotic in the mornings. She was used to it. She'd been standing there making Ellie's lunch, cream cheese on whole wheat, apple slices, a small container of crackers, when she saw the screen light up with Rosalind's name. She wasn't snooping. She would need to say that to herself several times over the following weeks and say it to Petra and eventually say it to a lawyer. She was not snooping. The message was right there. The screen was on. She glanced. And then she read. The thread went back further than she had the stomach to scroll through all at once, but she read enough. She read Rosalind writing, "Once the Kingston money is in play, you need to make sure it goes through the joint account first. She read Callum responding. She won't question it if I frame it as an investment. She read Rosalind. Make sure the title is in your name only. If it falls apart, you need to be protected. She read the phrase falls apart and understood, in a way that bypassed thought entirely and went straight to her body, that the it in that sentence was her marriage. They were planning for the failure of her marriage. They were planning to use her parents' money. Money that hadn't even arrived yet. Money her parents had agonized over and cried about signing away, to buy a property that her name would never appear on. Imogen put down the knife she'd been using to cut the apple slices. She very calmly finished making Ellie's lunch. She zipped up the container of crackers. She put everything in the small insulated bag with the polar bear on it that Ellie had picked out herself. Then she sat down on the floor of her kitchen and she did not cry. She was beyond crying. She was somewhere past it, in a place that was very quiet and very clear. She put the iPad face down on the counter. She texted her mother, "Can I call you tonight? Nothing urgent, I just want to hear your voice." She sent Callum a text that said, "Safe flight." Ellie says, "Hi." She dressed her daughter for daycare, drove her there, came home, called in sick to work, and spent the next 6 hours reading every single message in that thread from the beginning. It went back 11 months. 11 months of Rosalind advising Callum on how to handle Imogen. That was the word used, consistently, throughout the thread. Handle. How to handle the situation with her parents' property. How to handle her questions about the joint account. How to handle what Rosalind called, in one message that Imogen read 3 times to make sure she hadn't misunderstood, your wife's sentimental attachment to things that aren't hers to decide. Imogen read that and thought, I have been living in a house with someone who has been reporting back to his mother about me for almost a year. There were other things. Messages about a woman named Tatum who worked in Callum's Calgary office. Nothing explicit enough to be evidence of anything, but a texture to the messages that Imogen recognized. The way Rosalind mentioned the name carefully, gingerly, the way you handle something fragile, the way Callum changed the subject each time. She couldn't prove anything, but she'd known Callum for 8 years. She knew what it looked like when he was protecting information. She closed the iPad. She called Petra. I need you to not react, she said when Petra picked up. That's literally the opposite of what I do, Petra said. I know. Try anyway, she told her. There was a long silence. Okay, Petra said finally. First thing, don't touch anything. Don't move any money. Don't confront him. Don't give him any indication that, you know. Can you do that? I've been doing it for 11 months without knowing I was doing it, Imogen said. I think I can manage a little longer. She was very careful. She was, looking back on it, almost frighteningly good at being careful. She made dinners. She asked about Callum's trips. She sat across from Rosalind at Sunday lunch 2 weeks after the iPad and smiled and said the roast was wonderful, because the roast was, in fact, wonderful, and some small part of her found it almost funny that she could sit there noting the texture of a perfectly cooked piece of beef while also cataloging exit strategies. She found a lawyer through Petra's sister, a woman named Yvette, who practiced family law in Mississauga, and who had, according to Petra's sister, an absolute gift for making things very difficult for people who deserved it. Imogen met with Yvette on a Tuesday afternoon while Ellie was at daycare, telling Callum she had a dentist appointment. She sat in a clean, quiet office on the 14th floor of a building on Hurontario Street and laid out everything she knew. Yvette listened without interrupting. When Imogen finished, she said, You did the right thing not confronting him. Have you taken any screenshots? I took photos of the screen with my phone, Imogen said. Every message I could find. Yvette smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was better than that. It was a competent one. Good, she said. Let's talk about what comes next. What came next was 3 months of the most demanding performance of Imogen's life. She learned things she hadn't known she needed to know. She learned that the joint account had been slowly depleted over the previous year. Not emptied. Nothing dramatic. Just a steady reduction that she had attributed to the cost of living rising, to Ellie's daycare fees, to the general entropy of having a family. She learned that Callum had already spoken to a mortgage broker about a property in Oakville, a property whose listing she found, eventually, saved to a folder in his email that he had labeled, with an audacity she found almost impressive, investment research. She learned to read their finances the way she had once read her thesis footnotes, carefully, completely looking for what wasn't there. She told her parents nothing. This was the hardest part. Her dad called her one Saturday when Callum was out and asked if she was all right, because she'd sounded tired lately. She said she was fine, just a busy stretch at work. She heard him pause in the way that fathers pause when they know something is being withheld. She wanted to tell him everything. She said instead, I love you, Dad. I'll call you more. She didn't tell her parents because she knew that if she did, her mother would call Callum directly. Her mother had always liked Callum. Her mother had said, at their wedding, that she finally felt like she could stop worrying. Imogen was not ready to undo that, not yet. Not until she was ready to do everything at once. The confrontation, when it came, was nothing like she had imagined. She had imagined something cinematic, a dinner table, a moment of high drama, a speech she'd rehearsed. What actually happened was a Tuesday night in February, Ellie already asleep, Callum sitting on the couch watching a documentary about Formula One racing, and Imogen sitting down next to him saying, very quietly, I know about Oakville. He didn't move for a second. Then he picked up the remote and turned off the television. What? He said. The property. The mortgage broker conversation. Your mother's advice about making sure the title is in your name only. She kept her voice even. She had practiced this. I know about Tatum, though I'm choosing not to make that the main issue right now, because frankly it's almost secondary to the rest of it. Callum set the remote down on the coffee table. He stared at it. How long have you known? Since November. He turned to look at her then. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, or not only guilt. Something that looked more like the expression of a person who has been caught mid-construction, blueprints spread out, and is trying to figure out how much of the structure can still be salvaged. Imogen, I've already spoken to a lawyer, she said. Yvette is very thorough. She's prepared documentation on the joint account withdrawals, the mortgage broker conversation, your mother's communications advising you to protect assets ahead of a potential separation. There's a legal term for that. She paused. It's not a good term. The color left his face. I'm not here to fight, she said. Ellie is asleep 20 feet away and I will not fight in this house. What I am here to say is that I am leaving, and the process of how that happens is going to be much simpler for both of us if you cooperate with Yvette's recommendations. If you don't cooperate, it will become significantly more complicated. For you. Not for me, my mother. He started. Your mother, Imogen said carefully, planned this with you. I don't have a single thing to say to your mother. What I have is documentation. What I have is a lawyer who is very good at her job. And what I have is the knowledge that my parents' money, which, I want to be very clear, has not been transferred, has not touched our accounts, and will not be accessible to either of you, is protected. She had called her parents the previous week. She had told her mother, carefully, that she and Callum were having some difficulties, and that until things were resolved, she'd prefer the proceeds from the Kingston sale go directly into a separate account in her parents' name only. Her mother had gone very quiet. Then she'd said, Tell me what you need, sweetheart. Her father had not said anything. She'd heard him breathing. She'd heard him making the decision not to call Callum himself, which she knew was costing him. Callum sat on the couch for a long time. The documentary was still on, paused on a frame of a red racing car, frozen mid-turn. I did love you, he said finally. I want you to know that. I know you did, she said. And she did know it strangely. She believed it and found it completely insufficient in the same breath. That doesn't change anything. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to Ellie breathing through the baby monitor. She still used it even though Ellie was 3 now, still liked the sound of her daughter's breathing as she slept. She didn't cry. She had thought she might, finally in the dark, where no one could see. But she didn't. She felt, more than anything, like something that had been very tightly coiled had slowly released. The months that followed were not easy. She wouldn't pretend they were. Callum moved out in March. He went to stay with a friend from university who lived in Etobicoke. Not with Rosalind, which surprised her, until Petra pointed out that Rosalind probably wasn't thrilled that the plan had failed. That she'd had her own expectations about how the property and the money would flow, and none of them had accounted for Imogen finding the iPad. Rosalind called once, in April, from a number Imogen didn't recognize. Imogen let it go to voicemail. The message was 4 minutes long. She listened to it once, found that none of it changed anything she already knew about Rosalind's character, and deleted it. The divorce proceedings were, as Yvette had suggested they could be, significantly complicated for Callum. The documentation of the joint account withdrawals mattered. The mortgage broker conversation mattered. The text thread, which Yvette had her preserve in a very specific way, following a very specific protocol, mattered enormously. Callum's lawyer, who was a perfectly competent man from a mid-sized firm in Burlington, met with Yvette twice and then strongly recommended that Callum accept a settlement that Imogen found fair. Imogen took Ellie to her parents' property one last time that September, before the sale officially closed. It was a Sunday. The maples were already starting to turn at the edges. That first, hesitant flush of orange and red that meant the real color was 2 weeks away. Ellie ran ahead of her on the path down to the creek, and Imogen walked behind her, watching her daughter's rain boots flash orange through the grass. Her dad walked beside her. He didn't say anything for a long time. "You should have told us sooner," he said eventually. "I know. We could have helped. I know that too. I didn't want you to worry before I knew what I was doing." He put his arm around her shoulder and she leaned into him the way she had as a kid, when the world felt manageable when she was close to him. She let herself stay there for a moment. "Are you okay?" he asked. She thought about it, really thought about it, instead of giving the automatic answer. "I'm getting there," she said. "I think I'm actually getting there." Ellie had found something at the edge of the creek, a stone, or a frog, or one of those small discoveries that constitute the entire universe when you are 3 years old. She held it up in her small fist and called back to them, wanting them to come see. "Mom, Grandpa, come look!" Imogen's dad laughed. He squeezed her shoulder and then released her, and they walked down to the creek together, toward Ellie and whatever she had found. The maples held their color for another week and a half. Imogen drove out alone one morning before the sale closed, parked at the gate, and stood there for a while looking at them. She didn't go inside. She'd already said what she needed to say. She drove home through the back roads she'd known since childhood, past the farm stands and the small white churches and the hay bales wrapped in black plastic, and she thought about what it meant to know, finally, exactly where you stood. She thought she was beginning to understand, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.